Hi, welcome to Conflict Story, where we bring you the best and most fascinating stories just for you. Let's dive right into one of those stories. It begins like this.
I never thought I'd end up in a legal battle with my neighbor over property lines. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. My name's James, and this is the story of how my entitled neighbor Karen tried to build a garage on my lakeside property without permission, and how I took her to court and won. My wife Emily and I had worked tirelessly for years to afford our dream home on the shores of Lake Superior in Minnesota. We finally found the perfect spot, a charming two-bedroom cottage on 6 acres of wooded lakeside property. The previous owner, a retired park ranger, had meticulously maintained the land and wanted to sell it to someone who would cherish its natural beauty. When we first visited, I was captivated. The cottage itself was quaint, with a wraparound porch offering an unparalleled view of the lake. But the property was what truly stole my heart. Lush woods sloping down to a sandy private beach. I envisioned lazy summer days kayaking on the water and nights spent stargazing by a fire pit. The owner, a man named Frank, appreciated our enthusiasm and chose us over several other buyers. By spring, we were the proud owners of a slice of paradise. That summer, we poured our energy into making the cottage our home. Emily planted a wildflower garden, and I spent weekends building a small dock. We loved the peace and solitude, a stark contrast to the bustling city we had left behind. Most mornings, we'd sip coffee on the porch, watching herons glide over the water. Life felt perfect. Our nearest neighbors, the Millers, lived about a quarter-mile away. John was cordial but reserved, while his wife Karen was a whirlwind of unsolicited advice and relentless chatter. At first, we chalked it up to neighborly enthusiasm. She'd show up unannounced, insisting we try her zucchini bread or asking invasive questions about our plans for the property. It was annoying but harmless, until it wasn't. The trouble began in late September, when Karen and John decided to build a detached garage. One crisp morning, while walking near the edge of our property, I noticed survey stakes driven into the ground on our side of the boundary. Confused, I followed the stakes and found 2 surveyors measuring out a plot directly on our land. "Good morning," I greeted as I approached. "What are you working on?" The older surveyor glanced up. "We're marking the site for a new garage build for Karen Miller. Are you the property owner?" "I am," I replied, confused. "But there's been a mistake. This is my property. Karen's land ends about 50 feet south of here." The younger surveyor looked uneasy. "We were told this was part of the Miller's property." "It's not," I said firmly. "You'll need to double-check with your client." They apologized and began packing up their equipment. By the time I returned home, I saw Karen storming up our driveway, her face flushed with anger. "James, why did you send my surveyors away?" she demanded. I explained the situation, pointing out that the stakes were on our side of the boundary. Karen's expression darkened. "That's ridiculous. We've always considered that part of the land ours," she snapped. "Karen, the property lines are clearly defined in the deed," I said calmly. "I'd be happy to walk you through it." "I don't need to see your deed," she retorted. "That garage is going up whether you like it or not." She stormed off before I could respond. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of machinery. Looking out the window, I saw an excavator tearing up the very spot I had told Karen was on our property. Furious, I marched outside. "Stop this immediately," I shouted. The operator shrugged, pointing to Karen, who stood nearby with a smug smile. "Morning, James," she called out. "Exciting, isn't it?" "Karen, this is trespassing," I said. "If you don't stop right now, I'll have no choice but to call the authorities." "Oh, go ahead," she sneered. "I'm sure the sheriff will agree this is my land." I didn't hesitate. Within 30 minutes, Deputy Harris arrived. I explained the situation, showing him the deed and survey map. Karen, however, stood her ground, claiming the land was hers. "Ma'am," the deputy said after inspecting the documents and walking the property line, "it's clear this is Mr. and Mrs. McCarthy's property. You need to halt construction immediately." Karen's face turned beet red. "This isn't over," she spat before stomping away. But Karen wasn't done. A month later, construction crews returned, armed with what appeared to be a deed transferring a section of our property to her. As I confronted them, Karen arrived with a smug grin, claiming she had fixed the property lines with the county. This time, the sheriff's office couldn't intervene, and I had to call my lawyer. What followed was a whirlwind of legal battles, evidence gathering, and sheer determination. My lawyer uncovered that Karen had forged our signatures on a quitclaim deed and filed it with the county. The case escalated to criminal fraud charges, and an emergency injunction finally halted the construction. In court, the evidence against Karen was overwhelming. She'd not only falsified documents but also lied about paying taxes on the land. The judge ruled in our favor, ordering Karen to cover all legal fees and damages while referring her case for criminal prosecution. Karen's audacious scheme ultimately cost her everything. Her husband filed for divorce, and their house went up for sale within months. Meanwhile, Emily and I restored our property, planting new trees and reinforcing the boundary markers. Looking back, the ordeal was exhausting, but it taught us invaluable lessons about standing up for what's right. Now as I sit on our porch watching the sun set over the lake, I'm reminded of why we fought so hard. This land, our sanctuary, was worth every battle. Despite the court's ruling, Karen's audacity knew no bounds. The very day after the judgment, Emily and I discovered fresh tire tracks leading from Karen's driveway across the disputed land to the lakefront. It seemed she had taken up the habit of using our private path as her personal access road. We were beyond frustrated but determined not to let her antics ruin our hard-earned peace. After documenting the evidence with photos, I called our lawyer Jack for advice. He suggested filing for a restraining order to keep Karen off the property entirely. "She's testing the waters," Jack warned. "If you don't set firm boundaries now, she'll keep pushing until she finds a crack." The legal process was swift this time, thanks to the weight of the previous court decision. Within days, the restraining order was in place, explicitly barring Karen from setting foot on our property. We posted signs along the boundary and installed a camera at the path's entrance for added security. For a brief moment, it seemed like we could finally breathe easy. But Karen wasn't done. Her new strategy involved weaponizing the local homeowners association, of which she was a senior member. The homeowner association had largely been dormant in the years prior, but Karen suddenly sprang into action, pushing for new rules that would directly impact us. She proposed restrictions on dock sizes, noise levels, and even the types of plants allowed on lakefront properties. It was clear these changes were targeted at us, though Karen never mentioned us by name. "She's trying to make our lives miserable without stepping foot on our land," Emily said one evening as we reviewed the latest homeowner association meeting notes. I nodded grimly. It was another calculated move, and we needed a plan to counter it. The next homeowner association meeting was held at the local community center. Emily and I decided to attend, not just to defend ourselves, but to gauge the level of support Karen had managed to muster. The room buzzed with quiet chatter as we arrived, and heads turned when we walked in. Karen sat near the front, her arms crossed and an air of self-satisfaction about her. She barely acknowledged us. When the meeting began, Karen wasted no time presenting her proposed regulations. She framed them as necessary steps to preserve the character of the neighborhood and protect property values. But it didn't take long for others to catch on to her true motives. Several neighbors raised concerns about the sudden influx of rules, questioning their necessity and feasibility. "It feels like overreach," said a man named Peter, who owned a small cabin nearby. "We've never had issues like this before. Why now?" Karen's response was polished but pointed. "It's about maintaining standards, Peter. Some people think they can do whatever they want just because they have a lakefront view. That's not fair to the rest of us." Her gaze briefly flicked to Emily and me, making her target abundantly clear. When it was my turn to speak, I stood and addressed the group calmly but firmly. These new rules seemed less about community improvement and more about personal vendettas. My wife and I moved here to enjoy the natural beauty of this place, just like all of you. We're happy to follow reasonable guidelines, but these proposals feel punitive and unnecessary. A murmur of agreement spread through the room. Karen's composure faltered slightly, but she quickly regained control, insisting that the rules were in everyone's best interest. The meeting ended without a vote, as the homeowner association president decided to table the discussion for further review. It was a small victory, but Karen's tenacity left us wary of what might come next. A few weeks later, things escalated further. One morning, as Emily and I were enjoying coffee on the porch, we noticed a county inspector's truck pull into our driveway. The inspector, a middle-aged woman named Diane, introduced herself and explained that she'd received an anonymous complaint about unauthorized modifications to our property. "Modifications?" I echoed, bewildered. "We haven't done anything outside of routine maintenance." Diane nodded sympathetically. I figured as much, but I'm required to investigate. Do you mind if I take a look around? Of course, Emily said, though her voice was tinged with frustration. As Diane conducted her inspection, we trailed behind, pointing out features of the property and explaining our upkeep efforts. She found no violations but promised to file a report confirming everything was in compliance. Before she left, she hinted that complaints like this often stemmed from neighborly disputes. Let me guess, I said with a sigh. Karen? Diane smiled knowingly but didn't confirm. Just keep your records in order and don't hesitate to call if this happens again. That evening, as the sun set over the lake, Emily and I sat in silence, absorbing the weight of Karen's relentless campaign against us. It was clear she wouldn't stop until she either drove us out or faced consequences she couldn't ignore. The question was, how far would she go, and were we prepared to fight her at every turn? Karen's harassment reached a boiling point as winter settled in. One frosty morning, Emily and I woke up to find a large sign planted at the edge of our driveway. It read, "Beware disruptive neighbors." Beneath the bold letters was a laundry list of accusations, ranging from noise complaints to alleged zoning violations. It was absurd, and the petty malice behind it was infuriating. Emily shook her head in disbelief. This is getting out of hand, James. We need to take more serious action. I agreed. After documenting the sign with photos, I called Jack, our lawyer, who advised filing another formal complaint with the authorities. This time, we included Karen's recent behavior with the homeowner association and the bogus county inspection. We're building a solid case for harassment, Jack assured us. It's only a matter of time before this catches up to her. The following day, I went to the homeowner association president, a retired teacher named Linda, to discuss the ongoing issues. Linda had always seemed reasonable, and I hoped to gain her support. To my surprise, she revealed that Karen's influence within the homeowner association was waning. You're not the only ones she's targeted, Linda confided. Several other members have complained about her overstepping her bounds. We're actually considering a vote to remove her from the board. The news was encouraging, but it didn't stop Karen's next move. One evening, as Emily and I were returning from a grocery run, we noticed a group of workers unloading materials onto our property. Floodlights illuminated the area as Karen directed them with exaggerated gestures. What now? Emily muttered as we parked the car. I stormed over, my breath fogging in the icy air. Karen, what the hell do you think you're doing? She turned to face me, her expression smug. Just making improvements to the community, James. You'll thank me later. This is our land, I said firmly. You have no right to be here, let alone start construction. Karen's smile didn't falter. Oh, I disagree. According to the homeowner association bylaws, I have the authority to oversee improvements that benefit the neighborhood. And since this path leads to the lake, it's a community asset. That's ridiculous, Emily shot back. You're trespassing. Leave now or we'll call the police. Karen's confidence wavered slightly, but she held her ground. Go ahead. I've already cleared this with the county. Not wanting to escalate things further, I pulled out my phone and recorded the scene. Then I called Deputy Harris, who had become all too familiar with our situation. Within 20 minutes, his patrol car pulled into the driveway. After reviewing the footage and hearing both sides, Harris sided with us. Ms. Miller, he said sternly, you've been warned about trespassing before. This is a blatant violation of the restraining order. Pack up your materials and leave immediately, or I'll have no choice but to arrest you. Karen's face turned a deep shade of red. This is harassment, she sputtered. I'll have your badge for this. Harris remained calm. You're welcome to file a complaint, ma'am, but for now, you need to leave. Grumbling under her breath, Karen reluctantly ordered her crew to pack up. As they drove off, Deputy Harris turned to us. Keep documenting everything. She's pushing boundaries, but we'll catch her if she slips up again. Emily and I thanked him, though the victory felt hollow. Karen's constant interference was draining, and we couldn't shake the feeling that she was planning something bigger. A week later, our suspicions were confirmed. Late one night, we were jolted awake by the sound of an explosion. Rushing outside, we found our mailbox blown to pieces. Shards of metal and charred paper littered the snow, and the acrid smell of burnt plastic hung in the air. It was a clear act of intimidation, and we were done playing defense. The next morning, we filed a police report and handed over the footage from our security camera, which captured a shadowy figure placing something in the mailbox before running off. Though the person's face wasn't visible, we were certain Karen was behind it. Jack also filed a motion for an expedited hearing to address the restraining order violations and escalating harassment. The court date couldn't come soon enough. As Emily and I prepared our testimony, we felt a renewed sense of determination. Karen might have caused chaos in our lives, but we weren't going to let her win. The hearing would be our chance to finally put an end to her reign of terror, and we intended to make the most of it. The day of the hearing arrived, bringing with it a mix of tension and hope. Emily and I sat in the courtroom, side by side, while Karen occupied a seat across the aisle with her lawyer. Her smug demeanor hadn't faltered, though the strain was beginning to show in the tightness around her eyes. Our lawyer, Jack, was prepared. Over the past week, he had meticulously compiled every shred of evidence: photos, videos, police reports, and testimonies from neighbors who had also suffered under Karen's reign. This wasn't just about us anymore. It was about holding her accountable for a pattern of harassment that had plagued the community for years. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, called the court to order. "We are here to address allegations of harassment, trespassing, and violations of a restraining order against Ms. Karen Miller," she began, her voice firm but impartial. "Mr. Reeves, you may proceed." Jack rose and began presenting our case. He detailed Karen's actions, from the fake complaints to the mailbox explosion, backing every claim with irrefutable evidence. When he played the security footage showing the shadowy figure tampering with the mailbox, a collective murmur rippled through the courtroom. Though the figure's identity couldn't be confirmed on the tape, the circumstantial evidence was damning. Karen's lawyer attempted to deflect, arguing that the incidents were mere misunderstandings or coincidences. "Ms. Miller has always acted with the best interests of the community in mind," he insisted, painting her as a misunderstood advocate for neighborhood improvement. But the judge wasn't buying it. "Mr. Fisher," she interrupted, "it's difficult to see how planting defamatory signs, trespassing, and orchestrating construction on someone else's property aligns with community advocacy. Do you have any concrete evidence to refute the plaintiff's claims?" The lawyer's stammering response did little to help Karen's case. When Karen herself took the stand, she launched into a rambling defense, accusing Emily and me of overreacting and claiming that she had only acted to protect the neighborhood. Her words dripped with entitlement, and the judge's stern gaze didn't waver. "Ms. Miller," the judge said after a particularly outlandish claim, "this court is not interested in excuses or deflections. The evidence speaks for itself. Unless you have something substantive to add, I suggest you conclude your testimony." When it was finally my turn to testify, I spoke about the emotional toll Karen's actions had taken on us. I described the fear and frustration of waking up to find our property violated and our privacy ignored. Emily's voice shook slightly as she recounted the sleepless nights and constant anxiety, but her resolve was clear. "We just want peace," she said. "We want to enjoy the home we worked so hard for without living in fear of what Karen might do next." By the end of the hearing, the weight of evidence was overwhelming. The judge retired to deliberate, returning after less than an hour. "This court finds Ms. Miller guilty of violating the restraining order, engaging in harassment, and willfully trespassing on the plaintiff's property," she announced. "Furthermore, the malicious destruction of property and evidence of intimidation tactics warrant additional penalties." Karen's face went pale as the judge listed the consequences. She was ordered to pay a substantial fine, cover all legal fees, and provide restitution for the damages to our mailbox and land. Additionally, the judge extended the restraining order for 5 years and mandated Karen attend court-ordered counseling. But the most satisfying moment came when the judge addressed Karen directly. "Ms. Miller, your behavior has been nothing short of reprehensible. This court's decision should serve as a reminder that no one is above the law, no matter how entitled they feel." As Karen was led out of the courtroom, the weight that had been pressing on Emily and me for months began to lift. Justice had been served, and we could finally begin to rebuild our lives without the shadow of Karen looming over us. The weeks that followed felt like a breath of fresh air. Karen sold her house and left the neighborhood, a move that was met with quiet relief from nearly everyone. Emily and I focused on restoring the damage done to our property, planting new trees and adding security measures to ensure our peace of mind. We even organized a neighborhood gathering to celebrate the newfound sense of community that Karen's departure had fostered. Looking back, the ordeal was exhausting and at times disheartening, but it taught us the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity. Our home by the lake was worth every battle, every sleepless night, and every court appearance. Now, as we sit on our porch watching the sunset reflect off the water, we're reminded of the strength we found in each other and the resilience it took to protect our little slice of paradise. Are you hungry for more slices of stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss out on any videos. See you tomorrow.